In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night. Hello everyone, I am Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. And today I am reviewing Castle Freak from 1995. This is a review that was requested kind of casually shortly before the pandemic started in 2020. So sorry for getting to this so late, but this was requested to me by the amazing Ben from Cadaver Club. If you are not subscribed to him, he's a really, really great guy. I've done some streams with him and I've just chatted with him. Really cool guy. If you're not subscribed to him, he's kind of a staple in the horror community, at least in my eyes. Please check his channel out. So this film came out in 1995 and it was directed by the late great Stuart Gordon, who is probably best known for directing Re-Animator, and he has also done movies such as Dolls and The Pit and the Pendulum. This movie stars Barbara Crampton, who was also in Stuart Gordon's Re-Animator, as well as being in From Beyond, also directed by Gordon, and films such as You're Next and Chopping Mall. Jeffrey Combs, who is also in Re-Animator as the titular Re-Animator, Dr. Herbert West, who is probably his best-known character. He was also in films such as Stuart Gordon's From Beyond with Barbara Crampton, as well as The Frighteners, the 1999 remake of House on Haunted Hill, and Fortress. Raffaella Offidani is in this film in one of her only ever screen performances. That's kind of an overstatement, but I could not find that many screen credits for her, and among the few others that I could find besides this movie are The Smile of the Fox, Suffocating Heat, and Love in the Mirror. And this film also stars Jonathan Fuller, who was in the 1991 Pit and the Pendulum with Jeffrey Combs, directed by Stuart Gordon, as I said, as well as being in films such as Last Man Standing and Skyscraper. And this movie is another Full Moon production. I have reviewed a few of those as of late. Charles Band really seems to have his fingers in everything, as do other members of the Band family, such as Richard and Albert. At least according to the internet, this is an adaptation of The Outsider by H.P. Lovecraft, which is one of his stories that I have yet to read, so I don't know how faithful it is, but I doubt it adheres super closely to Lovecraft's story, because as good a writer as Lovecraft was, albeit being a piece of shit human being, he never really dealt with a lot of themes that I think this movie deals with. This film's story follows a family, a husband and wife and their daughter who is blind, who discover that they have inherited a castle in the middle of Italy and proceed to move there. But while they are staying there, we discover that there has been a horrible trauma in the past of this family. Their son, JJ, has died in a car crash, which also left their daughter Rebecca blind. This has left the wife, played by Barbara Crampton, very much at odds with the husband, played by Jeffrey Combs, who blames himself for everything because he was driving drunk. On top of this, we discover that there is, of course in this castle, a freak named Giorgio, who has been chained up in the basement for years and years and years, being horribly tortured and denied his right to ownership of the castle, basically. Around the same time that the family move into this castle, Giorgio breaks out of his chains and mayhem ensues. And the score for this film was done by Richard Bands, son of Albert Band and brother of Charles Bands, and he's done a million scores, especially for Full Moon movies like the Puppet Master franchise, as well as doing movies such as Mutant, which I have reviewed, and Troll, and his score for this film is one of my favorite Richard Band scores I've ever heard. I like his score for Re-Animator, but it is a blatant ripoff of Psycho, and you can't just tell me it's an homage, because what the hell does Re-Animator have to do with Psycho at all? But his score for this film is very classically spooky. It uses synth sounds to create something very gothic and orchestral sounding, but it was clearly done on a budget all with synth sounds, but that does not detract from the great atmosphere that the score creates. But at the same time, other parts of the score, especially the main theme, use an actual string section, which I really love, because it's very dissonant and scratchy sounding in a way that is reminiscent of a lot of my favorite dark classical pieces that use very angular sounding strings. I also really like this movie visually speaking. The cinematography feels very grounded, if that makes sense. There's a little bit of a shakiness to the camera in a lot of the moving shots that has a very handheld feel to it that I don't know if the cameras were actually being handheld in those moments or not, but it definitely gives this very grounded, like, sense of the camera's presence in those moving shots, which I'm not sure if I like or not, but it doesn't detract from the film in any way for me. The castle is absolutely gorgeous. I'm fairly certain this was a real location, much like Full Moon did with the Subspecies movies, shooting them on location in Romania. This film seems to be shot on location in Italy, which is to the film's benefit because everything looks gorgeous inside and outside of this castle and in the surrounding area. It feels very natural, but also lends itself to the very European Gothic flavor of the film, which I love. By contrast, the costumes of the characters in this movie are fairly modern and mundane. There's not even anything kind of spooky period gothic going on with Giorgio because he's naked for most of the film, but I like that there isn't anything too flashy going on with the costumes because it is a good contrast to the over-the-top gothicness of the story, and it grounds these characters and their very real personal issues in reality. And as much as I love those things, there are also things visually that happen in this movie that I find hilarious. Notably, there is a scene where Rebecca is asking for water, and there are police officers in the castle who are going to fetch water for Rebecca, and one of them gets a plastic bottle of Dasani water and is carrying it around on this like ornate metal tray, and just the juxtaposition of those two things is hilarious to me. Character-wise, I've gotten into this a little bit already, but I love Barbara Crampton and Jeffrey Combs as this couple. They have really great range as actors, both of them, because they're playing characters here in another Charles Band produced movie directed by Stuart Gordon, but they're playing completely different characters from their characters in Re-Animator. There's a completely different dynamic going on and completely different personalities. And yes, I can tell that they're the same people, but even aware of that, the characters that they're playing feel dramatically different from their characters in something like Re-Animator. Even in the film, before we really dive deep into their troubled relationship and traumatic past, there is this understated sadness to their characters, which later in the film explodes into this really aggressive intensity and all the right moments for the most part. And even as troubled and melancholy as they are, there are these really sweet, heartfelt moments where you see that despite them being at odds with each other because of this traumatic death that has occurred in their family, they still really care about Rebecca and care about her enough to stay together and really care for their daughter. There was just a lot of really great nuance to both of them, even when they had their very over-the-top scenes, which I liked. Combs's character in particular has these really great shifts in mood throughout the film. He's clearly playing a specific character, but he plays all these really great different angles of the character. We see him very understated and being very sweet to his daughter. Then we see him very aggressive. We see him break down and cry. we just see all of these different sides of the character that I love. The character himself has these kind of cyclic alcohol issues going on that remind me in a way of Jack Torrance in The Shining. Not in that he is abusing anyone, but in that him using alcohol has led to this traumatic event in their family that has kind of led to this rift between him and his wife. And the way that he is dealing with his grief is by drinking more, which just makes everything worse. In spite of how sad the scenes are and how tense these scenes are, the scenes where Jeffrey Combs gets drunk are hilarious. The way he just kind of plays this extremely sloppy drunkenness are just really, really funny to me. There are also just moments of like real pitifulness and self-loathing in those scenes that are legitimately sad to watch, but just his very exaggerated kind of fatigued motions in those scenes are comedy gold, and I love, love, love everything about his performance. A lot of times when characters of nationalities that are not American appear in American films, I'm like, I'm not sure how accurate the depiction of this character is. Again, this film was made on location in Italy, so I kind of get the sense that these backgrounds Italian characters of the police force and the castle's groundskeeper, housekeeper, whatever you want to call her. I get the sense that the actors that played those characters were actually Italian. I'm not sure, and if they are not Italian, I do not know how well they play an Italian character, but I will say that those characters were also very likable in their own ways and had these great moments of pathos to them. I really, really love the character of Rebecca. I do wish they had kind of developed her a little bit more and just given her other things to do besides being the blind daughter to some extent. You get a sense that there's more to her character than being blind and being very troubled by her blindness. But I do wish they had explored those kind of other sides of her character a lot more, just to flesh her out and give her a little bit more personality. But when they do explore how she kind of deals with her blindness, they do it really well, because while there's obviously some sadness going on, she's also just pissed off because her family are kind of sheltering her and holding her hands way more than she would like. She's like, this is my personal issue. If you don't let me go and deal with this on my own in my own way, I'm never going to be able to live my own life. But they're understandably really, really worried about her, but they're just kind of sheltering her and holding her hand so much that she can't do anything on her own, and it's pissing her off. And I loved that they don't just make it a melancholy woe is me thing, which is there, but they really bring some kind of anger to that. I quite like the character of Giorgio as well. Despite him acting from behind a ton of makeup and being a mute character, aside from inarticulate groans that he makes, you really get a sense of his emotions. And he reminds me of both Radu in the Subspecies films and Frankenstein's monster, because he is this kind of spurned abomination in his family. Although there's also kind of a sense that maybe his deformity has developed because of being tortured over the years, but also maybe he's kind of been spurned and rejected because of his deformity. It's not 200% clear, but regardless, he's really been denied the life he really deserved, and just due to the horrible conditions that he's had to live in, he has embraced his monstrousness, both like Frankenstein's monster and to some extent Radu. He's a lot more self-loathing and still trying to reach out and understand people, a lot like the monster, especially Karloff's monster, because he's this inarticulate creature who doesn't really know his own strength and ends up hurting people and hurting his own situation unintentionally. Radu is a lot more self-righteous and outright vicious. He has a lot more understanding of what human good and evil is. He just doesn't give a shit, and he wants to do horrible things to people and delight in them, which we don't have here, but kind of the denial of birthright and embracing of monstrousness that comes with the character of Radu is also present in Giorgio, and I thought that was just a nice little parallel. Much like I've talked about with the visuals in this film, the story of this film mixes classic Gothic tropes, like this creepy old castle that's been inherited, and this thing in the basement that nobody speaks about, and creaks in the night, etc., etc., mixed with these scenes that feel right out of a domestic drama. And the horror of the film is really both about, oh my god, there's a freak in the basement killing people, but also coming to terms with this traumatic death that's happened in the family. The trauma is kind of a backdrop to what's happening there, but it also really ties into what's happening in this movie, because when Jeffrey Combs finds the tomb of Giorgio, who was supposed to have died when he was a kid but did not, he sees a photo of young Giorgio who looks a lot like JJ, the kid in their family who died in the car crash. This really sets Jeffrey Combs off, and he's like got the sense that somebody's in the house with them, and his wife is like, no, you're just losing your mind because of what's happened in your family and because it's your fault. I'm not entirely sure what to make of the Giorgio JJ parallels going on here. It's a little bit weird, but I found it interesting nonetheless, and it kept me watching. The movie even has an uncomfortable dinner scene, much like in a domestic drama, which I thought was really nice. It's like for 2 seconds. It's not like one of those drawn out uncomfortable dinner scenes that you'd see in something like Edward Scissorhands, which are really uncomfortable. But we just get this little moment of them sitting at the table and moping, and the housekeeper comes in and is like, oh, your daughter's not eating, and Barbara Crampton's like, yeah, she basically just pecks at it like a bird. You're not gonna get her to eat a lot. And she's just like, oh, you guys should just really enjoy the meal together. Sharing food makes a family. And they just look at each other with kind of this sadness in their eyes, and then it cuts to the next scene. And that's the other thing that I really liked about this movie. There are just these little lines of dialogue that are one-liners, if you will, but they're kind of deep one-liners. They really get at the heart of what's actually going on in every scene. And I think one of the best examples of this is when police are called to search the castle, and they don't want to because it's really big, and they don't believe there's actually anything in there. There's like a smashed mirror in there, and Jeffrey Combs' hand has been bandaged up, and they're like, oh, there's a smashed mirror in there, and you've got this kind of bloodied hand bandaged up. What is all that about? Jeffrey Combs is like, what the hell are you trying to say? Why would I smash your own mirror? To which the police officer replies, maybe you don't like what you saw. The only thing I didn't really like about this film's story is there is a long chase scene towards the end that drags a little bit for me. If they had cut it down just a smidge, it would have kept the adrenaline and everything really going while still having some tension to it. It just feels a little bit drawn out to me, but that's really my only downside to this story, besides one other kind of trigger warning worthy event that I'm going to get to momentarily. Also, one other good point, there is a plot relevant sex scene in this movie, which never happens. I kind of get the sense that Charles Band just tries to put nudity in every like adult oriented film that he produces. A lot of times in other films that I've watched of his, like the Subspecies movies, I'm like, okay, this doesn't not make sense in this context, but it also doesn't need to be here. But Stuart Gordon actually turns that into a plot point here, which I thought was impressive. Effects-wise, the makeup on Giorgio in this film is gorgeously grotesque. I don't really know how he is supposed to be deformed, but you just kind of get the sense that he's been deteriorating and falling apart from being down in this dungeon for so long. His skin is discolored, his fingernails are way too long, he's got this scar up one of his cheeks, and as I mentioned, aside from this one sheet that he kind of wears to hide his deformity in certain scenes in the film, he is naked for most of this movie. And the fact that this makeup effect was applied to his entire body just makes it all the more impressive. This film is not a gore fest, but the moments of gore that are in it are very gnarly and very well done in my opinion. And aside from all of those things, I do have one little trigger warning to give, and it's the only real spoiler I'm going to give for the film, but I kind of have to. Giorgio kills and eats a cat, and it's an adorable cat that gets set up earlier in the film. We don't see the cat get eaten, but they show you the carcass afterwards, and I do have a few little qualms with this film, but the only reason I did not give this film 5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd is because I'm still bitter about the fact that Giorgio ate a cat. So all in all, I think this is the best full moon movie I have ever seen. I even like it more than some of Stuart Gordon's other work, like Re-Animator. It's just this great blend of gothic horror with an edge of camp and grittiness and cheesiness to it, with this really moving dark heart and very real tragedy to it. I would recommend this to just about any horror fan out there. It's just a really, really well-made movie with a heavy dose of cheesiness, and it's clearly on a budget, but the storytelling that is going on in this film is just that good. I think this is definitely one that is worth owning on physical media. I would like to at some point, but for those interested, it is currently free to watch on Tubi, which is where I saw it. That is my review of Castle Freak. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!